Hey y'all, it's Cindy, your Sassy Southern Grandma, back this week to talk about Southern home remedies. Now, if you weren't raised in the South, you may think some of this sounds crazy, but we're going to go through a bunch of things that people use in the South when they're sick. Do you ever feel like the butter done slipped off your biscuit? That is a commercial, a line from a commercial in Tennessee when I was there years ago. It was a commercial for some kind of tonic, sort of like Geritol, but it was a local thing that apparently nobody else ever saw if you were not in that area. But it had a picture of a biscuit and some butter sliding off the top of it. And that was their way of saying, are you tired? Are you run down? Do you feel like you just don't have any energy? Has your butter done slipped off your biscuit? That's how they were selling this tonic. So that gives you a little taste of what goes on in the South as far as things we do when we get sick. Things we do to remedy physical ailments that we have. And I'm sure some of you have heard of many of these. If you weren't raised in the South, you might not have, and it might sound kind of crazy. But we're going to go through a few of those things with you today. One of the more unusual things that I remember when I was growing up is my grandfather. Whenever you had an upset stomach or you didn't feel good or you kind of felt queasy, he would say, put some peanuts in your Coke and drink it. Now, some people just use this for a snack because it's the kind of sweet and salty thing together, but he always said it was good for your stomach. He was not a doctor nor any kind of health professional, so
It's not like I'm a doctor.
it was just something that he had passed down and apparently had worked for him many times, so he always told us, put some peanuts in your Coke, which seemed kind of like a choking hazard to me for kids, but that was his thing. Get you some peanuts and Coke. When my mother was a child, she had a bad stomachache, and she was known for trying to get out of going to school because she hated school, and I did not get that from her. I love school, but she hated going to school and complained for days about this stomachache. And my grandmother's cure for everything was castor oil. I think the point of it was, if you keep complaining, I'm going to keep giving you this nasty stuff. So best thing for you to do is stop complaining and go to school, because she thought she was just playing. She thought that she was just trying to get out of going to school by saying she had a stomachache every day. Turns out my mother had appendicitis, and the doctor said the worst thing you could have given her was castor oil. So lesson learned. Kind of be sure you know what you're doing when you give a kid something. But she lived and she was fine. She's 80, almost 81 now. But that's some of the things that people pass around, is castor oil for everything. The other thing, and this is almost a nationwide thing now, I think, Vicks. Vicks Vapor Rub. It's like the Windex for white people, apparently, because you know that movie, My Big Fat Greek Wedding? The dad was putting Windex on everything from windows to a sore on his arm or his leg.
Put some Windex.
Yeah, that's not a cure for anything either. But Vicks does work for some things. I had a friend, though, that her mother gave it to her by the spoonful when she had a cough and a chest cold. She said my mother actually made us eat a spoonful of Vicks, which also sounds dangerous. But it says right on the bottle not to ingest it internally, but she lived to tell the tale as well. But some of the things people do with Vicks, we have, of course, put it on your chest when you have a chest cold. When I have a cough, I'll put it on my throat. If it's one of those coughs you just can't sleep because you just can't stop coughing, that dry, tickly cough, I'll put it on my throat. Silences the cough very well. And of course, the old put it on your lip to help a stuffy nose. And my mom was really good about saying, put a little bit up in your nose. That'll help. So I think it works just as well on your lip. However, some people also say put it on the bottoms of your feet and put on socks, and it will help you get better. I'm not sure that that does much but soften your feet. It moisturizes your feet, but a lot of people swear by it. And in the medical profession, we call that the placebo effect. If Sally calls and says, I put the Vicks on my feet and it helped, I was better in 2 days, then it gets passed on to the next person and the next person. And a lot of that is the mind saying that Vicks is going to, what they say is it draws out the infection, which medically does not happen, but it could help. if you believe it can help. Another thing my dad used to do is when he had aches and pains, he had a leg that hurt or a back that hurt, he put a bar of Ivory soap in the bed with him. Now, I never knew what the rationale for that was or why, but he swore by it, and as far as I know, had a bar of soap in his bed till the day he died, because any ache and pain he had, he would put that bar of soap in there. Just something that was handed down. But if people believe it, if they do it, they feel better, hey, it's no harm done with that, not like putting Vicks down your throat. When we would actually get the stomach flu, when I was a child, the first thing Mama would do is go get Sprite and saltine crackers, because we never kept sodas in the house when I was growing up. It was a treat to get a Pepsi Cola. So she would run get a Sprite and some saltine crackers, and we would eat that, and it really did help settle our stomach. I'm sure the crackers absorbed some of the gunky acid and stuff in our stomach, and the Sprite helped settle it. But a lot of times it was just for symptom relief. It wasn't really getting rid of the flu, but it did make us feel a little bit better. Unlike peanuts and Coke, I wouldn't think that would feel much better. Now, for a cold, for a bad cold, respiratory congestion, head cold, any kind of respiratory thing, my former mother-in-law made this concoction that she never really told us everything that went in it, but I know she used a mason jar and she put whiskey and honey and lemon, and I'm not sure, there might have been turpentine in there for all I know. And then at the end she put one of those big fat soft peppermint sticks in it, put it in there, put the lid on, and when that peppermint stick was dissolved or corroded from whatever was in there, she said it was ready. We were there visiting one time and one of my kids had a cold, and she somehow coaxed them to taste it and take some of it. I'm not sure that it did anything, but it sure kept the child from complaining anymore, because they did not want to taste any more of that stuff. And a lot of people use whiskey and honey and lemon for sore throats, saltwater gargles. Those are things that are pretty common that people use. But I'm not sure exactly what was in her concoction. Since I grew up in North Carolina, the tobacco capital of the world back then, every field was full of tobacco, and they would rotate with soybeans and corn, but tobacco was the cash crop. There was a lot of government subsidies for it, so most farmers had a lot of acreage of tobacco. And ironically, people used a lot of tobacco. You never saw hardly any adults, especially men, that didn't smoke. And if they didn't smoke, they dipped snuff or they used chewing tobacco. Now, it wasn't just the men. There were a bunch of old ladies that would put a little chewing tobacco, a chaw of chewing tobacco down in between the cheek and gum, and you wouldn't even really know they had it, because they were old ladies, you know, they didn't have real slim faces, and you couldn't tell that they had something packed in there. But when a kid would get a bee sting, the first thing they would say is, "Come here, let me put a bit of juice on it, it'll draw it out." They'll spit out some of the juice. Makes me kind of sick to think about it. Spit out some of the tobacco juice and rub it on that bee sting, and they swore it would pull the stinger out, pull the pain out, it'll be healed. Every kid knew which grandma you could go to get some snuff if you got a bee sting, and there were lots of clover around there, so you were pretty likely to get a bee sting at some point in your childhood. Another bug that bothered us was chiggers. At least that's what they called them. They called them chiggers, and if you went out to play in the woods, which we did back then, we played outside all day. We didn't sit in the house and play video games. So we played outside until we absolutely had to come back in, because every time I went in my house, Mama gave us a chore to do. So we pretty much stayed outside. But we play outside in a field or in the woods, and we get what they call chiggers, little red bug bites, and they itch so bad. And they told us that there was little bugs that burrow into your skin. Now that I'm an adult and I've looked into it, the ones that burrow into your skin are actually scabies. That's a whole different bug. But chiggers would bite you. But the remedy that they had, I can't tell you how many times I've had clear fingernail polish put on bug bites on my legs, because that was the cure. What they told us was it would take the oxygen supply away from the chigger and it would die. So we're thinking there's bugs in our legs, but in reality there really weren't. But it did make the itch go away, because that fingernail polish would kind of numb up that area and at least keep it still and not itchy for a while. So fingernail polish on your little bug bites really did help with the symptoms. Didn't make it go away any faster, but it kept you from scratching it so much. When I was about 5, it was before I went to school, so my parents moved 13 times in the first 12 years they were married, and I was born just a year after they were married, so it was a lot of moving. It was mostly for Daddy's jobs, or they got a bigger house for less money, or whatever, but we moved a lot. And one of the houses I remember the most, because I was around 4 or 5 when we moved there, and we stayed a couple of years, was a little house out in the country next door to the church, which was convenient for Jesus because we had to go over there all the time. But we had a ditch in the front of that house. It was out on a country road, so there was a ditch and then the road. And my sister and I used to love to lay down and roll down the ditch. I'm sure most kids have done that. Well, unbeknownst to us, there was apparently some poison ivy growing in that ditch, because one morning I got up and my face was swollen. My eyes were almost completely shut. My face was swollen. Just my face. It wasn't anywhere else. But it was very obviously poison ivy, and we found it in the ditch, and Daddy got rid of it. But it was horrible. And it was very painful and very uncomfortable because my whole face was swollen. And thank goodness it was before I started school and I didn't have to worry about going to school looking like that. But my mom was good friends with the pastor's wife, so they were talking about it, and the pastor's wife said, I know exactly what you need. And she went and got this weed off the side of the road that she said will heal it a lot faster. It provides relief, plus it helps heal up the poison ivy. And it did. And I didn't ever know the name of it, but I've looked into it since then, and it was apparently jewel weed. And I've put a link down in the description to what jewel weed looks like, what poison ivy looks like. So if you come across this, and you might be able to find that jewel weed, what they did was took the leaves, put them in a pot, boiled them like collard greens, boiled them, and then took the juice that they were boiled in, strained out the leaves, took the juice and soaked cloths in it, soaked rags in it, and applied those rags to my face. I can still smell it to this day. I know exactly what it smells like, and it wasn't very pleasant, but it really helped. It really helped to reduce the swelling, reduce the pain, reduce the inflammation that was in my face. So some of these remedies are really something that one plant does counteract another plant. So we can't discount a lot of these things, but it really worked for me, and I've always told people about it, especially in North Carolina, because poison ivy's everywhere. And a lot of people are in rural areas there and get in contact with poison ivy, and they need those kinds of remedies that work quickly. And before too long, it was probably a week or so, my face was back to its regular, the way it looked, and my eyes weren't swollen anymore. And you may think, if my child woke up in the morning and their face was swollen so much that their eyes were almost closed, we'd be at the emergency room. That wasn't a thing for us. We didn't go to the doctor unless it was for vaccinations or something that absolutely was out of the norm. I went to the emergency room once in my life growing up because I broke my collarbone. I was running around with some girls in the church yard after church and tripped over one of them and fell and broke my collarbone. And they almost didn't take me to the emergency room then, but I wouldn't stop crying. I was around 5 or 6 when that happened. And I remember Daddy saying, maybe we need to take her to the hospital. And my mom was like, oh, she'll be all right. She'll quit crying in a few minutes. No, I didn't. It was very painful, I remember. And it really wasn't a full break. It was just a fracture, but I was a kid and it hurt. So that was one of those things that we did go to the emergency room for. My brother fell off his top bunk and his front tooth went through his lip down here, and he had to have a couple of stitches. He went to the emergency room for that. He went to the emergency room a lot. He was always stepping on rusty nails and all this kind of stuff. So boys, get into more stuff usually than girls. But we didn't go to the doctor for every little thing. We didn't go to the emergency room for every little thing like people do now. But there were so many home remedies that people tried and used, and they'd try one thing or try another. And Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't, sometimes it was that placebo effect, and especially for kids, sometimes it was just something to make them be quiet. And that's usually what ended up happening, is the symptoms went away and the kid was okay after that, went out and ran around in the woods some more. One thing I learned from my patients in North Carolina was taking a teaspoon of mustard for muscle cramps. I was very surprised. I'd never heard this, even growing up in North Carolina. But these, I was working in a cardiac unit, and there were several patients I had that were older and would get a cramp in their leg, and they would say, just get me some mustard. Get me a little packet of mustard. I'll be fine. And so I would go find mustard. They would take it, and apparently the salt and the acid and the vinegar in the mustard does help, where usually a lot of time muscle cramps is dehydration and lack of minerals that you need. So it could be partially placebo effect and partially help, but in any case, it usually would help them. So anytime an old person wants to get some muscle cramp and they want some mustard, I go get it for them. So that's something you might want to try if you ever have muscle cramps. There are a lot of Southern remedies and bordering on superstition kind of things for women that are having babies, women in labor, women after having a baby. The two that stand out to me is putting a spoon under your bed for afterbirth pains. I don't know where that came from, but it is something that I heard a lot in growing up and in being a nurse and things that people would say. If you have afterbirth pains, which is just your uterus contracting after the baby's born, usually doesn't happen with the first child, but can happen with subsequent children, and it's very painful, and it's very, very strong uterine cramps, and it hurts. But the older ladies would say, get a spoon, and you have to put it lengthwise. You can't put it this way across like the woman's waist. It has to go in the same direction the woman's body's going on the bed. There are rules. And it would draw out the pain. I never really tried it because I didn't believe it, but a lot of people believe in stuff like that. And the other thing is cabbage leaves. If a woman is breastfeeding and her breasts are swollen or painful or engorged, get cool cabbage leaves, cool them in the refrigerator, and then put them inside your bra, and that will help. Well, of course, the coolness will help. It will help with inflammation. But some people also think that you should boil them first and do them warm. So I'm sure either heat or cool would help with some of the discomfort. Not sure that it actually does anything about the swelling, but it's very much a believed in thing. So people still do it sometimes. And I'm all for, if it's not harming you, go ahead and try it. I tell my patients that sometimes. Hey, it's not hurting anything for you to do that, so go ahead if it makes you feel better. So that's a lot of the remedies that I have heard about. I'd love to hear about some of yours. Another thing I'd like to share with you is a few things that especially daddies say in the South if you've got a headache. I had a boss when I worked in tobacco. I worked in tobacco fields as a child. When someone would say, oh, my head hurts, he would say, first time I saw that head, I knew it was going to give you trouble. Ha ha ha. Everybody would laugh except the person with the headache. My daddy would say things like, come here, let me stomp on your foot, it'll make you forget about your headache. Or, it'll quit hurting before you get married. That's a famous one. Any kind of pain you have, it'll quit hurting before you get married. Didn't help the pain, but I guess it made them feel better that they gave you some reassurance. The other one is, it'll feel better when it quits hurting. No joke. But you can't talk back in the South. You can't say, yeah, right, Daddy. You can't say that. You just go on about your business when Daddy says, it'll feel better when it quits hurting. So some of those things just get passed around, and everybody's daddy says it or everybody's mama says it. It's just the way it is in the South. They pass things around like they pass dishes at Sunday lunch. One of the ones that is kind of universal, I'm not sure if it's really a Southern thing or not, but anytime my kids would say they had a stomach ache, they didn't feel good, they just had some kind of minor complaint, I would say, have you pooped today?
Have you tried pooping?
I guess I got that from my mama because she would ask us that, but it's now a family joke with my kids now that they're adults. Anytime anything happens, they'll ask each other, "Did you poop today?" It doesn't cure everything, but I guarantee you it cures a lot of things, makes you feel better. So keep that in mind. If you don't feel so good, think back, did I poop today? It's a big thing. Thank you for watching today. I appreciate you all being here. Be sure and hit that subscribe button, the like button. It helps the channel a lot. And want to remind you that I have Instagram at Sassy Southern Grandma. We'd love to see you over there and have you follow us there. And I also have a website, sassysoutherngrandma.com, where I have a store that I'd love to see you come over and check out some of the items that we have there. And I'm going to be adding some new items soon, so keep a lookout for that. We're glad to have you this week. Can't wait to see you next week.
Y'all come back now. Here.